And so the early group came and we just had some small group discussions and we saved the panel, which is kind of the meat of the day for 5:30 when you got here. So that's where we are right now. Let's have our new people who came in introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name's Anna Shook. I have a 7-year-old son at Topatopa Elementary in 1st grade, and my daughter's almost 2, so she's home with me part-time. I work part-time.
Great.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm with San Antonio. My daughter is 7 and my son is 5, and I'm also the PTO president. I wanted to come and see.
Great.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I have a daughter at Nordoff who's a junior, and I teach 3rd grade over at Ojai Valley School.
I'm Angie Junassi, and I'm a kindergarten TKK teacher at Topatopa, and the union president for the Ojai Federation of Teachers.
Excellent. So we will go into our presentation in just a minute, but I want to, is there any small group reporting out from this first question that anybody wants to share with the group? I heard out of my side ears some good conversations. Anybody want to share what we talked about? What they talked about?
Sure.
Good, because I have lots of wait time. I'll just hang out.
One of the things that we talked about is are there definitive best practices when you are talking about school safety? Or is it still so open that it's a decision that we make on how we want to move forward based on our own schools? And then also about how do we get more of the adults involved in identifying red flags, right? Well, the presentation that I gave to our schools talked about warning signs and identifying those kids who are on the fringe, because those are the kids that are the ones that are having these attacks. As these kids are on the fringe. These are not mainstream kids that are resilient, that are engaged. These kids are not engaged in their schools at all. And so how do we identify them, and then what can we do about it proactively at the school, so we can do a much big fan of the prevention side versus the other.
Great. Robin, do you want to share from our group?
We talked about creating some common language instead of just saying use age-appropriate language, giving parents what that actually would look like that mirrors what we use in the school, so that it's not confusing to kids if they're hearing something different at home versus what we're practicing in the school. And then to the second question, some type of plan that we're sharing with parents that really outlines what we're doing in general, maybe not the specifics of it, but how often we conduct fire drills, how often we conduct lockdowns, how often we're trained as a staff in these different activities.
This is a real question because when, we had the threat at Nordoff, I had some parents who were like, tell us specifically where every police officer will be on Facebook. And we were like, well, we're not going to do that. That's not really a good plan. And then they were like, can you assure me that one's going to be here and here and here? Well, no, we're not going to do that either. But it's hard because people want information. Parents want information. They want to know that their kids are safe. But also there's some information that we probably need to keep private and use for training, and that's not out there. So we'll ask our security experts about this question, but I wanted to tee this up to frame, there's some things we may tell you, and there's some things where we may want to have general, like it's that balance, and I don't think we found it yet, of giving you enough information to feel safe, but not so much specific information that we put kids at risk. Right, and how to have that balance. So in our group, we talked about maybe having a response to parents that says, if we're not going to make this public, but if you're really interested, please schedule a time to come meet with your principal, and they can walk through the details of what we have and talk it through with you, instead of like, here's a document on the website that you should go to that has everything. Right. All right. How about the group in the back?
So one question that we had, which sort of framed everything that came from it, was what do we know what makes our schools vulnerable? And I'm assuming our experts here will tell us a little bit about that. And we did talk about informing our community about the things, as Robin brought up, about the things that we do as part of our monthly, just keeping our kids safe and keeping us sharp in terms of monthly fire drills and ongoing drills, those kinds of activities.
No, that's good.
Wesker.
Well, in addition, we talked a little bit about red flags too, but we have a parent who also works at a high school in Santa Barbara, so we were able to compare a little bit of notes. We talked about the difference between, you know, a planned drill versus kind of a surprise drill to see, you know, how people might behave naturally versus the plan. And then we talked about the, you know, safety plans and procedures and, you know, thinking about, well, our kids know them and, you know, are we giving them information that then they might use against us?
Oh,
And is there anything we
right.
can do against that? So we were just kind of, you know, bouncing these ideas off of Doug, our consultant.
And that's something maybe we can have all of our experts address. Like, it's a really tough balance, right? And since we're kind of considering multiple threats, there's not really one good answer for that. So let's go ahead and do introductions for anyone who, and I will one more time explain, I messed up the flyer. It said 5 o'clock somewhere and 5 o'clock somewhere, 5:30 somewhere else. It is my fault. I apologize. You're not late. It is 5 o'clock on some flyer somewhere. So we just structured the meeting, so we did a couple of questions for the people who were here early, and then we saved the bulk of the presentation for 5:30. So if you just walked in, would you do me a favor and just introduce yourself? We'll start here.
My name is Jasmine Dalto, and I have 2 kids in the Unified School District, and then I teach at a private school.
Great. How about over here?
I'm Shane, this is Liz, and we had a kid at Rodolph.
Great.
I'm Sybil Demaro, and I have a daughter at Matilaha and a son at San Antonio.
Great. And there was someone else there. Right.
Hi, Lisa Williams, and I have a son in 9th grade.
Great. All right. So I'm going to ask our expert panelists to come up here, but you have to sit in front of a microphone. So,
Captain Fryhoff stepped out.
okay. All right. Well, we will still ask. Are you okay over there? Then? You can sit right here.
That's right.
Project.
And I'll just reintroduce, this is Doug Haynes with Haynes Security. He is a security engineering expert, retired from the, well, this is a test for how good I was listening earlier, retired from the Navy? Air Force, sorry. I met you through the
Back to
Navy,
class.
that's why okay, sorry.
You're lining up for the principal's
I
office.
know, sorry.
Oh, you guys don't do that anymore? Oh, okay.
So Doug and I met in my prior job. Somehow I was on the Regional Defense Partnership for the 21st Century, which was with the Navy. And somebody said, you have to meet this guy Doug after one of the maybe Sandy Hook or something. You have to meet this guy Doug. And so Doug and I
Right after
came
Sandy
out
Hook, yeah.
and he met, and I didn't actually have an opportunity to work with him in my last job significantly. And so when I came here and we had the Nordhoff threat, and I said, I know somebody who might be able to help us with this because I am not a physical security engineer. That's not what I do every day for a living. And so I can walk around campuses and see what I see, but I don't have the lens of an expert. So Doug came, and Doug very kindly volunteered to do a site walk at every single site. So we have been doing site walks for 1 to 2 hours at every site. We walk around, he has a checklist, he looks at things that we can improve, areas where we might be able to make improvements, and he has for us 3 different recommendations, right? So level 1 is like something that we could just do right now if you turn that person's chair this way, or I don't know, I'm making that up.
Good example.
Level 2 would take a little bit of money, but things that we could probably do, and then level 3 would be things we would have to write grants for. The great news is Doug also has written lots of grants for this type of work and is generously volunteered to help us write some grants also. So that's really good. And then once we have those recommendations, those site walk recommendations, we're going to work with each site and work on their team, work with their safety teams, their threat assessment teams, and walk through those recommendations as well. And then walk through the current safety plans and safety procedures at each school, and then revisit those kind of with Doug's help. Did I capture that right? Mm-hmm. Good. And then, Captain Fryhoff, our police chief, who's done great training for our teachers and is also here to help us in kind of making sure both of those pieces come together in a way that keeps our kids safe. So I have some questions that they are going to walk through as experts. So I'm going to walk through the slides. They're going to both answer, and then if you have questions to ask them after each slide, you can ask them questions.
Okay.
Does that work for you? And then we were recording this in case we want to use it, so I just feel like I want that microphone to just, okay, I know. So first question, these are misconceptions that I have either heard one or both of them talk about. I found a few on the internet, so I just wanted to, and if you have other ones we can talk about. So misconception number 1, all school shooters fit a consistent pattern.
Yeah, there is no way to identify, based on a pattern alone, a school shooter. What we do know just from the history is that they tend to be male. They tend to operate alone. More often than not, they've been Caucasian. But otherwise, there's been times where there's been multiple students. There's been times there's been females. So it's very hard to then say that kid's going to be a shooter, right? We don't have that. We don't have that ability. So that's my experience and what I've read and studied, and just to give some additional background about what I have done as it relates to school safety is when I was in 2007, I created a threat assessment program based on the Secret Service's dissection of all these different school shootings that we had had. I went to a conference down in San Diego that was put on all by psychologists, and so it was a lot of training on how to address the issues ahead of time, right? These kids are all on the fringe. How do we get them engaged? How do we make sure that they're resilient? And making sure that the schools have a team identified to be able to address a student who either makes or poses a threat. Because in 80% of all school shootings, somebody knew about the attack before it happened. 80%. That's a lot of opportunity to intervene that didn't get intervened. And so we want to make sure that that information, people know who to tell. And I think that's going to be our biggest bet towards safety is when the parents are at home and their child says, hey, I just saw on Instagram or on Snapchat or whatever, Johnny said not to come to school tomorrow. Pick up the phone, call 911, and then I'm going to be on the phone with Tiffany, right? And that's like we did on Sunday for this threat was, hey, we got notified, and then we start working together to make sure we're on the same page. And then we're going to be paying a visit to that house, to that student, talk to the parents, because, and I've talked to Mr. Munson about this before, I said, you have 600 kids on campus. I guarantee you have 600 kids that don't want to die. We want that information to help. So I built this threat assessment program in 2007. I've presented it to every school in the county. I actually did a lot of presentations at the County Office of Education. And right after Sandy Hook, when the training was announced, the training filled up so quickly, they asked for me to do it 4 times. And I think I had the full ballroom a couple of times to get all the administrators in the county through it. There's obviously a lot of turnover, so it's why it's important to every year to do it again. I've told Dr. Morse I'm happy to do it here whenever.
And we just trained our teachers.
And we just
our
did
staff
we just trained all the teachers for all of this, less than a month ago, and on what the expectations are. And then on the heels of that, if we fail at identifying the threat and we have a shooting, now what? And so the current training is run, hide, fight. If you haven't seen it, that's probably what if you do any research at all on how to respond to an active shooter, there's really 3 choices. It's run, hide, and fight. Those are your options. And it doesn't have to go in that order. You might have to start off fighting. You might start off hiding and then have to start running after that. But have that plan ahead of time. And like I've told the teachers, this isn't just while you're at school. This is if you're at a movie theater, a restaurant, a concert, any place where there's a large gathering, where there's a potential for violence, you have to have a plan. And the sooner you can develop your OODA loop, if you can get the 2 O's in your OODA loop down, right, military term, observe, orient, decide, and act. If you've already observed your area, oriented what you're going to do and where you're going to go, and then in your mind, if it happens, this is what I'm going to do, you're that much closer to being able to act and saving yourself. One of my sergeants who did my active shooter training and has been doing it at a lot of the businesses in Ventura County was at Route 91. And when he got there, it was with his girlfriend. He says, if there's a shooting, that's where we're going. And she looks at him like, what are you talking about? Because I'm just saying, because I've been doing this training. It gets me really thinking about what I'm doing. And if there's a shooting, that's where we're going. Well, as you know, there was a shooting, and they went where he went. They took everybody that was with them, they went into a Connex box and were able to be safe, and then in between reloads, they were able to run down a street and get away. And he received numerous phone calls from employees that work throughout the county that he had given the training to, saying, your training absolutely saved my life, because I was there too. So anyway, that's my experience as it relates to this in particular. So
Yeah,
that was a
well-
long-winded answer to that first slide, sorry.
It's okay.
And,
If I
what,
cut you off later, you'll know why.
really what the chief is talking about is about behavior. And so that is so important, identifying the behavior ahead of time. But in the meantime, the other part of it is the physical security aspects of the school. How can we make the school safer so that when something, hopefully something won't happen, but if it does happen, how do we keep it to a minimum?
Right.
And so that's my point of view, or that's where I'm coming from. And there are a bunch of things that we can do. You know, some of the things you're gonna see, some of the things you're gonna go like, what's that all about? And then other things are gonna be right in your face. That's the way it works, right? Because the bad guy sees it just as well. So, and we're talking a lot about active shooters, but active shooters are not the only threats to schools.
Right.
Okay, misconception number 2, school shooters are bullied loners. So we can identify them in our school because we just look for the bullied loner and we know that's gonna be the person, right?
And that's, and you're right, and that's not always the case, right? That is true some of the time, but that is not the only case. Columbine shooters were not bullied, right? They were just had different thoughts about the world than the rest of the kids did. And they weren't loners, they knew a lot of kids. They did actually shot a video of them shooting up the school and turned it in as a homework assignment, and caused enough concern that the teacher had talked to the principal about it, but that's where it stopped. But if you listen to the 911 calls, like I have done numerous times, one of the shooter's dads calls in to the dispatch center and says, I think my son's involved in the shooting at Columbine. And they go, involved how? He claims to be a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, right? So there were some red flags for that dad, and maybe had that video caused a concern for them to make this threat assessment team and make those notifications and get the parents involved. That dad might have been able to shed some light, going, yeah, he's been acting a little bit different, he's been hanging out with this other kid. Now we can do some on the prevention side of it, but so they're not always bullied, and oftentimes there's these kids that are deciding to shoot others. It's a vengeance. It's the one in Santa Barbara was a kid who was self-identified as incel.
Incel.
Yeah, for those that don't know what incel is, you start reading a lot about it more now. But it was involuntary celibate. So girls did not find him attractive, at least in his opinion. They did not find him attractive, and so he posted his video the day before the shooting saying, I don't know why you don't find me attractive, but you're going to pay for it. So there's actually been a lot of articles recently in news things about the incels. So
Yeah, it's actually a group. Incel is actually a group. Yeah, you can belong to it if you like. Yeah. If you don't know what it is, I got a good article you could read. Yeah, very good article. Just came out in the Campus Safety Magazine this past week, so.
All right, misconception number 3, school shooters are all mentally ill.
So this is the challenge, right? Clearly they're not mentally well, but that doesn't mean they suffer from mental illness. They're two totally different things, right? There's a huge population of people that have mental illness that are being treated for it that would never be a active shooter, a school shooter, or to that regard. But that doesn't mean they're mentally well, because certainly somebody who is mentally well would never do it, right? We can all agree that that is not a normal behavior.
All right, misconception number 4, fences, cameras, and school resource officers on campus will solve everything.
I wish. So no, that is not accurate, right? So cameras will only let us know what's happening after it's already happened, right? Or collecting evidence after the fact. They're great for break-ins and burglaries and stuff like that, but for school safety and student safety, cameras are not the primary thing for us.
And let me pause. Doug, do you want to talk a little bit about, we'll go one by one, so let's talk about cameras.
Well, but I'm not totally done yet,
Oh,
but because
okay.
there are some benefits if it's being monitored by somebody. If it's
In
just
real
cameras
time.
that are collecting data, that doesn't do anybody any good. If you have a camera at your entrance points and somebody is watching that and observing behavior, now it's got value. If it's an unmonitored system, then all it is evidence collection.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and the key
That's
to
okay.
monitoring is in real time.
Right.
And then that real-time person has to be connected to a response force of some sort that can show up in real time. So there are a lot of things that have to fall into place for it to be effective. And that very seldom happens. 99.7% of data that's collected by video cameras is actually just thrown away. Only 0.3% of video cameras ever result in anything. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll just put a camera on it, you're gonna waste your money, right? So let's do some other things that are more effective, that will actually help us, right? Now, there is value to cameras, I won't deny that.
Right.
And one of those values is especially when the police or the responding forces need to show up, fire department, police department, medical people need to show up, they can tie into the camera systems and they can see what's going on. And so they know where to go. So there is advantage to it, but if the purpose of the camera system is to catch the bad guy, it's not gonna happen.
So fences. So fences are a double-edged sword, right? Not only you're fencing people out, but you're fencing people in. I'm not a big fan of fencing off schools. I don't think they should look like prisons. I think that we should give the students, and trust me, every kid in high school knows how to get off that campus, right? I mean, there's no doubt that if they had to run for it, they can get off of that campus. So having them be able to get out is important. And then if you start looking at the past school shootings that have occurred and what they did have, and realize how ineffective it is, like Parkland in Florida was a completely fenced off campus. And those gates were monitored. They opened the gates 30 minutes before school got out. The shooter got dropped off by an Uber driver with his rifle bag and went in and started shooting kids because the gates were open because he knew the system, and he wasn't even a student there anymore. He had been a student, but wasn't currently a student there. There was an SRO there also. And in Columbine, the very first school shooting, one that kind of put school shootings on the map, had an SRO there also. He just wasn't at the school at the time. His sergeant took him out to breakfast that day, but he was going to be the first one that they killed. That was the plan, was to kill him first. So SROs are not going to solve everything. Fences are not going to solve everything. Cameras aren't going to solve everything. But I think if we take a collection of physical security that we can control, being able to lock doors easily from the inside, whether it's those lock blocks so the door closes and locks. You want to use things that have your gross motor skills. You don't want somebody trying to use a key to lock a door when somebody is shooting people, right? You're not going to get that key in the keyhole ever. So we want to have your gross motor skills be able to be used, be able to block off people's view, whether it's blinds and getting in the habit of just closing the blinds at random, not all the time, right? Because then they'll never know if there's somebody in there or not. Just randomly close your blinds. So, but
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. It's good. No, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Fences, it takes less than 4 seconds to get over a fence, so fences are not the solution. And the SRO, if there is one, it's gonna be the first one shot, because it's gonna be part of the plan. So the effective use of SROs is not to have them on site all the time, because they come on a random basis.
and that's what we do here. So the school district obviously does not pay for a school resource officer, but I get about $100,000 a year of what's called COPS grant, a supplemental law enforcement money. About half of it goes to pay for our scheduler. The other half I get to use at discretion, right? So I use it for extra patrol in the arcade. I can use it for the Ojai Day. I can bike patrol around SRO stuff as well. And I've told them, I said, don't be predictable. We'll let the principals know when we're coming, but we're not going to let anybody else know we're coming. And so we'll just show up, and all the deputies know to be seen on our campuses. Be present, and they're very well aware also of the threat, right, and our fear, and as a result, it's on their radar always.
And the reality is, if we had an SRO here, because of the size of our schools, we would not have an SRO that was always on one campus.
Right.
That SRO would have to be shared, which takes the effectiveness down considerably, right? Because they would always be moving around.
It would be
Right.
the advantage is they would be random at all the schools, right? Which
Yeah.
fills the one part of it, right? We want to have them be random there, but they don't get to develop the relationship with all the kids that you would want them to be able to develop because they're not there long enough to develop that relationship. So we have an SRO there the SROs that we have don't get to have that kind of time where they get to really engage with the kids, but they show up and are able to walk around and be friendly with all the kids on an unpredictable basis. And I think that we draw that balance pretty well with what we have.
Yeah. In terms of being there
Right.
100% of the time, our school size doesn't really support that.
We also invited your deputies to come to our parking lot to write out reports and
Right.
just kind of park and be seen for a certain amount of time. And like you said, it's very random and unpredictable, making us, less of a target.
Yeah, and that, because one thing that the school shooters do is they plan really well. These are not kids that are just snapping. This is a well planned out attack. They do their research. They search all their previous school shootings and try and build on the successes they had and find out ways to be more successful to kill more kids. And that's why when we talk about intervention, the intervention side, the prevention side is identifying kids that have these red flags or warning signs or that are now making threats. Where are they at on this timeline for this act? And if they've made the threat, is it tomorrow? It's usually by the time they've told somebody they're going to do it, it's usually fairly quick after that. But the planning has happened for a while, and so there's a lot of opportunities to intervene, and that's what we want people to be aware of, parents to be aware of what to look for.
Which is kind of
Oh.
leads to this, right? School shootings happen out of the blue and cannot be predicted. Misconception number 5.
Yeah, that's not totally accurate. Right? There are like Sandy Hook, I think was one you could say was out of the blue and could not be predicted. That kid picked a school and targeted it just because, right? But most of these other ones have some type of nexus to the school. Most of them are students there, and they have some type of a grievance that they're trying to address. And oftentimes they're tipping their hand. Like I said, 80% of the time they've told somebody else beforehand that they were going to do it.
Yeah, there's some analytical software out there that's now looking at this kind of stuff, on predictability. One of them looks at current crime rates and current crime activity, and where there isn't any, it predicts that there will be at some day. It's a matter of probability, something like that. Fortunately, I'm going to see some of that in November. I'm going to a conference, so I'll be able to check it out and see if it really makes any sense or not. I'm kind of skeptical, but.
Yeah, I think that,
but-
anything you trying to predict human behavior is very difficult, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
If anything, humans are not predictable,
Yeah, but always
so-
works good in the lab.
Then in the lab it works good, right? And if you have enough data, you can go back and create a software to make it work based on data that you know about. The problem is making that data work forward, and then what do you do with it when it tells you you're going to have a problem? Now what? Because we all still have rights, we all still have
Yeah.
rules to follow, and like I said, I don't know.
It was a Tom Cruise movie like that, right?
Yeah,
Minority Report?
yeah.
Misconception number 6, training schools and teachers in active shooter response is the best solution. So having like active shooter lockdown drills on a regular basis for our kindergarten through 12th graders.
I don't think that that's a good thing, right? Because number one, I can't tell you, and this is one of the things about teaching active shooter training is there's a lot of what do we do if? And I can't answer that question for you because I have no idea what the threat looks like. I have no idea how the attack is going to happen, how many they're there, whether they have guns, cars, explosives. I want you to start framing your world differently, and I want you to think about it in terms of run, hiding, and fighting, right? When I went to a training, we were talking about the shooting at Virginia Tech. There were students that were shot sitting like this. That is not an appropriate response to somebody trying to kill you. Now, we've talked about, and I think I even sent my Facebook post to the community after the threat at Nordhoff, talking about age-appropriate discussions with your kids. I have 2 girls, 15 and 12. One's a high schooler at Royal High because I live out in Simi, and the other one's at St. Rosalima Catholic School. She's in 7th grade. But they both know to run, hide, and fight. I said, if they get shot in the back running away, so be it, right? I certainly don't want that to happen, but I don't want them sitting still. They will run, they will hide, or they will fight. And that's the discussion you have to have with your kids. And you need to start preparing them, just like I did when they were a little bit younger, about if somebody tried to grab them. I go, if somebody ever grabs you and gets you in the car, I go, the moment that thing comes to a slow down, jump out of the car. You are going to be safer jumping out of a moving car than going where they're taking you. Now, my kids do sleep at night, yes, they're not terrified with nightmares. But we have the discussion often enough that, you start off with the age appropriate when they're younger and, and they hear it. And just like with drugs or anything else, you don't get to have the messaging one time. You want to have the message consistent of what your expectations are and what the hazards are and why it's important for them to fly right and then be prepared. So, and they obviously knowing what I do, I think they already have a sense that it's a little bit different experience growing up with me than maybe others. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the Land of the Blue Trees?
Okay, actually, I was just gonna follow up on what the Chief said, is that the training really needs to be age appropriate and needs to be just this is kind of the way we do stuff at our house, right? This is the kind of the things we talk about sometimes. In order to teach kids to go to a safe place, I wrote a kid's book last year called Pip and the Land of Blue Trees. It uses a dog character to go to a safe place, a magical place called the Land of Blue Trees. And some of my friends think that blue means someplace where the police are. I'll let them think that. And then along the way, this Pip character collects or makes friends with other animals, and then they sing and dance and carry on crazy and get to the Land of Blue Trees where they're safe. Right? There's nothing in the book about active shooters. It's about looking both ways across the street, asking your parents if you can leave the house, not walking alone, and not walking at night. That's all it is. But it's done in such a way that it's not a security book. It's a fun book, right? And so what research is showing that the run, hide, fight for little kids is really traumatic. Mm-hmm. So we need to approach it in a different way. The run, hide, fight, and talking about getting shot in the back, that's for older kids, right?
Right.
Just like we do for fire training. What happens in the smaller grades or the lower grades? The fire truck comes and they get to see the dog and the fireman and all that stuff, and they learn to drop and roll. And then a little bit later on in their academic life, they learn how to use a fire extinguisher. They know how to call 911. And then when they get into high school, they actually do other things, CPR and that kind of stuff. So it has to be, this is just the way we do business at our house, and I think that's kind of what you're trying to do for your school district as well. This is just kind of how we do it.
And I think
right?
that we watched a video that another agency had put together. It was a really good video, and it just talked about, like I said, getting to a safe place. And for the younger kids, it wasn't, because for younger kids, running, hiding, and fighting is not their options, right? They're not gonna. You have grammar school kids who are not going to be fighting. They might be able to run depending on where they're at, and their hiding is probably going to be their best defense at their schools. But those are the type of conversations you have, is saying, we need to get to ourselves to a safe place. If where we're at is unsafe, we need to get to a safe place. Well, what does that look like? Where is a safe place to go? And then you can have those conversations about, the teacher saying, hey, if we need to leave, and I tell you kids we're going to leave in a hurry, we're going to go over here, right? And that's, they don't need to know all the other drama, right?
Right.
Because it will be traumatic. And we don't want them to be fearful. And even like when we give the talk to adults, I say, listen, I know that this may scare you, but I'm not trying to have you be paranoid. I just want you to be more aware. Just be more aware of your surroundings. And when you're in areas where there's large gatherings, be a little bit more in that condition yellow, almost a condition orange, not oblivious, right?
My wife's always saying, just turn it off, but I can't help it, so.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have to worry, because she knows, when she's with me, she knows she's gonna be okay. I'm gonna put her on the outside when we walk down the street.
So, in Ohio Unified, we chose not to do active shooter drills. We do regular fire drills, regular lockdown drills. But a lockdown drill doesn't necessarily have to be an active shooter. We could have a lockdown drill for bears, which we were just talking about earlier. I think probably every school, maybe close to every school, has had a lockdown drill for an actual bear on campus. But that's not the same thing as an active shooter drill. So what we do to talk about kind of this active shooter is we just talk to kids, and it's really classroom by classroom. It's where would we go if we were in this classroom? What's a safe place? It's kind of a continuum, and I'll tell you, we don't have all the training materials that we need for these conversations. We are just really thoughtfully doing this work now. And there's frankly not as much out there available commercially as you would think. You'd think there would be like really good packaged products. We're like, here's how you talk to kindergartners.
Yeah, it's not there yet.
It's not. And so we're developing our own safety training video. The class at Nordhoff is going to work with us, and we're going to develop kind of our own videos with the chief here, which will be appropriate to us and what we want to do. But so we do practice drills, but we don't have that kind of fear-based drill that you hear about other places, because we just don't think that the research and our experts support that as being a best practice.
And we talked about before, if you had a run drill at Nordhoff, you're not going to get them back from the drill, right?
Yeah.
School class is
We
over.
do it at the end of the day.
And if we talked about it, if we did it as a drill for truly an active shooter, and we said, okay, school's almost out, active shooter drill in effect, flee. Kids are going to drive crazy. They're going to drive off the curb. They're going to run over each other, and we do not want to set that environment at all. It is a training environment. So the lockdown drills are good to do because they're used for more than just the active shooter. Obviously, it's a component of the active shooter part of it, but it's more likely to be used for the bear on campus or some crime that occurred down the street, and we're just telling you, hey, lock the schools down. So.
Any questions for our experts at this point?
Do you think it's, I teach kindergarten, TK and K, and one of the things that I do is talk to my kids about just following directions.
Mhm.
So that if you're walking on, like if you're coming back from the cafeteria and a teacher tells you to come in the classroom, that you go in the classroom. Because kids, if somebody says that, they question and they don't know, I'm supposed to be at the kindergarten yard, and they don't know. So I've been trying to prepare them, just, if Mrs. Oakland says come in the classroom, you go in the classroom.
Right.
And you just follow the directions. Do you think that that is an appropriate, it's not a scare tactic, it's just, when a teacher tells you what something to do, you do it. And I'm trying to get that through them, so it's never about, I never mention why.
Right.
But if a teacher asks you to come in the classroom, you should. Does that seem appropriate? I mean, what I'm trying to do is get them to,
Be prepared to. So we call it a preparatory command, right? Right before you give somebody a command, there's a preparatory command. What you're doing is you're prepping them up for hearing something out of the ordinary, right? Kids are creatures of habit, and they do very well with habit. And so you're right. They always come back from here to the cafeteria, and I go here, right? But occasionally that may not be the case. And by letting them know that, I think that's very appropriate, because you're not telling me. You're just saying, if another teacher calls you into the classroom, you need to listen to the teacher, because there could be a good reason they need you in that classroom right then. So I know it may not be part of your plan, but if they're telling you to get in there, go inside the classroom.
okay,
I think that there's nothing wrong with that,
okay.
in my humble opinion. But I am not a kindergarten teacher.
You'll have a chance to chat with our experts in small groups in a minute, so I will transition to kind of the next part. I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing here in Ojai. So I broke this into kind of short-term and long-term. So for short-term, we have all staff training, and I will say there are some staff members that didn't attend that day, were gone. We're trying to have regular and ongoing all staff training. So it's not just once a year, and as Captain Fryoff mentioned, there's so much turnover, we really have to do it on a regular basis, right? Regular drills, so as I mentioned, earthquake drills, fire drills, lockdown drills. We developed we're working on something called threat assessment team. So this is something that we received in our training. And do you want to talk just a little bit about what a threat assessment team is?
Yeah, so the threat assessment team is a multidisciplinary team, right? You want to have a school administrator, a counselor, and law enforcement representative as your minimum core team, right? And if the schools all know who your threat assessment team person is, in most cases it'll be the principal, and they can add to that team, because depending on who the child is that you're going to do the assessment on will determine who you add. One thing that I talk to the teachers about is to not underestimate the power of the relationship they have with these kids. They spend more time at school than they do at home, and there's a really good chance that they have a very good bond with one of those teachers, or because they like a class better, or there's if they're in band, if they're a math lead, or if they're whatever. That teacher is going to have some insight into that child that others may not. And so that's why it's important that you build your team with them. And then there's a set questions to go through to start dissecting, okay, who made the threat? When was the threat made? what was the context of it, who heard it, how long ago was it, where's the student now? And then not only do we have the school team that's there, so you're, like I said, no matter how many teachers you need to bring in, but then you get the parents involved, right? Because the parents are a huge part of that team, as like I said, based on the Columbine phone call from that dad. He knew there was something wrong with his kid. He wasn't sure what it was, but when the shooting happened there, it was like, man, I can't imagine the feeling he had when he saw the shooting at the school, and he called into the police station and said, I think my kid's involved. So that's the team is, that's the purpose of them, is to sit and methodically go through these list of questions and then find out where, if there's a child that's on this pathway to violence, where are they at on that pathway, and what can we do to intervene? Even if these kids make a threat, they're not going to jail for the rest of their lives, right? Most times they're juveniles, they're not going to go to jail at all. The school's going to have a procedure then for how do you integrate them back into school. And that's why it's important to have the administrator on the team, preferably the principal, because one thing is if there's something wrong with the school, culturally, or if they're being isolated, not even being bullied, just being isolated, all kids know one thing. If something's going to change in that school, only the principal can make it happen. So it's really valuable to have the principal engaged in this team when we're dealing with them, because the kids know that's who's going to make the changes.
And I'd like to point out, by the way, all the principals in the room tonight, right? So all the ones who don't have an event are here tonight because this is important and they know they're key to this work, so thank you. We are also working on student training. That's slowly being implemented. One of the things we're kind of waiting on is to do these building assessments and these safety plan assessments, and then to come back around and do some more robust training with teachers specifically at each site. One of the things that I got in my small group earlier from my parent friend back there is really putting out some specific site information for each site to say, you know, here's what we've done at San Antonio. Not that stuff that we don't want to publicize, but just saying here's what we worked on school by school by school. I think that's really good feedback that we can do. So it's all kind of in progress. See Something, Say Something campaign. Again, the graphic design class at Nordhoff made these See Something, Say Something posters. We talked a lot about how we think sometimes people are reticent to call 911. So if I see a threat on social media, I might not call 911 because that feels like that's what you do for a car accident or a fire or something. But there's another line that kids can call, and it goes to the same dispatcher basically, but it's an actual phone number that you would call that doesn't feel quite as intimidating as 911. So we made posters, we've been publicizing that number, we've been asked our teachers to put it in their cell phone number. Do you want to give it out right now?
Yeah, it's 805-654-9511. 805-654-9511.
I was just at Nordhoff. They were hanging the posters up in the hallways today, because we understand that 80% is really important. So we want to give kids a mechanism to be able to report things if they see something, regardless of what time of the day. So why do we have a police number and not a school number? Because if kids see something over the weekend, if they see something when we're not available, they see something at 5 o'clock and they just email the principal or they email the school, we might not see that, right? And a lot of times these things are like we were saying, imminent. And so we want a number that you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and get somebody, and then we immediately get a response and we start working through the problem together. So we thought that was a better number than having a school number that might not be, I mean, I sometimes sleep, Dave sometimes sleeps, like.
Occasionally.
Yeah. And then searches. We had the dogs come earlier. They did a weapons search in lockers. So we will do again that idea of having random searches for we were both drugs and weapons. And so if kids have something in their locker, they know that there's a chance that we might bring the dogs and find that. And then long-term, looking at our safety plan assessments, project prioritization, and then finding funding for those really big projects that we need. That'll be one of our goals. So Doug's been out there rustling the bushes for us. These are elements that we consider. Access control, so who can get on campus. We've been working on having lanyards for our staff, lanyards for our IT techs, lanyards for our whoever's coming on campus. That seems like a basic thing, but it's something that we didn't necessarily have in place across the district. Some schools had it and some didn't. But now across the board, anyone who's new gets a badge and a lanyard that's clearly identified as being part of our team. Working on our security technology, we had a conversation recently, and it turns out we have cameras, but they're not connected into the police department. So we worked on that. We're in the process. There's some tech stuff happening, but
And eventually, that's our goal, is to have, the Sheriff's Department developed a program called ARTIC, and it stands for Advanced Real-Time Information Center, so that if there's a call to 911 and we have access to the cameras at that business, that the dispatcher can log in and watch what's happening live and provide that information to the officers as they're responding. So that's, technologically challenging for a lot of reasons, but it's something that we're building towards, because we have a lot of other businesses here that I have their security cameras that I have on my phone that I can access at any time, and eventually we'll have that all in Arctic as well, so if they have a break-in, then when 911's called, they can pull it up and see it.
working on the social emotional support for students. So some of those misconceptions that we talked about, we know that these kids that do this are not mentally well. So how can we help them to develop both school connectedness and the tools that they need to overcome challenges when they have them? So if, I don't have a girlfriend, or people aren't talking to me, or if I'm bullied, what do I do about that, and how do I solve those problems? So that's a huge focus in our district. Our elementary schools all went through toolbox training. Our middle school has a daily advisory with a second step program. So we're really working on that. The high school has a new program whose name I'm forgetting, where they identify students who are connected to school. And what's it called?
5-star students.
5-star students. You star something. 5-star students. So every student is essentially tracked, and if they are not connected and participating in some way, that's a signal to the counselors and the teachers to go talk to that kid and make sure they're doing all right. So we are really working on these 4 areas this year as our focus for school safety. So now I want you to have some discussion. So I'd like you to turn your chairs around. You're going to form groups of like 4 to 5, and I want you to talk about how can parents, students, and community members play an active role. And then I'll scroll through a couple of questions. Please identify a note taker who will take notes and give them back to us. Okay?
Ready, go.
Go. And I'm going to ask our experts to go join those
Ready,
groups.
set, go.
Ready, set, go.
Ready, set, go.
I'm going to bring your small group discussions to close.
That could be the piece that they need, right?
I remember now the reason that I made it 5 was because I wanted you to end by 6:30, because it's like dinner time, stuff to do, and so 5:30 was too late. I was thoughtful about making it 5. I just didn't clean it up everywhere. So, is there anything really important, critical, interesting that you wanted to share that came out of your group discussion in a 30-second blip?
You don't want me talking, go ahead.
Well, I think we were having an interesting, and I didn't get to ask my final question, but what do we do for students who feel uncomfortable and want to report that but don't know how? How do we give, or parents too, from elementary to high school, how do we give them that safe way to say, I don't have a reason, but this is making me feel uncomfortable, so that they don't feel like they're being a snitch, but giving a red flag. That's my question.
Yeah, and I think one of the things as we work on this see something, say something, right? And we put out this police line, and it doesn't say on there it's a police line, it just says call this line. I mean, I think what would happen is on the back end, we're working, so if you get something that's like, not something, you're not gonna roll officers out to somebody's house, but you're gonna let us know, hey, I got this concern, right?
If I get told about it, so if we don't send an officer out, then we may not get told, and so maybe that's something that we need to make sure that if it's a threat, we're gonna, trust me, we're gonna send somebody, but if it's a matter of like, my child just doesn't feel safe around this other kid, or they make them nervous, that's a conversation that they should be having with a school administrator or a counselor right away.
Yeah.
And because that could be the piece of the puzzle that's missing to something that we may be aware of, and now all of a sudden now the students are coming forward saying, hey, there's just something not right. Okay, now we've got some red flags that we're going to then work on a much more proactive level. So I think that adding to that component of it, for the things that don't quite rise to the level of a threat, but are enough to make kids feel uncomfortable, that we need to have a mechanism for that.
Well, here's what I can add, is that we have threat assessment protocols throughout the district, and that is threat to others and threats to yourself. But that's not how we initiate the conversations, like, hey, we heard you're a threat. No, it's what we do, we call it like a wellness check, you know, and we can use other information, so we could use grades, we could use, you know, teachers saying, hey, you just don't look like yourself, as ways of starting a conversation, and then through the course of, you know, kind of a question and answer process, you know, we start to gather information. And it also, we do our best to try and, you know, hide, you know, the source of, you know, where the complaint or the concern is coming from. You know, because we understand that there's a, you know, people don't want to be seen as a rat, they also are worried about getting a friend in trouble, but we approach it more like a wellness check.
I think that is the biggest issue, or, you know, this is, and I'm sorry, I'm talking about high school, but these kids are so into like the social and what's cool and what's not, and, you know, to just feel safe and comfortable enough to open up, I think is number one. It's like, what, so, I don't know, if I did, I would be giving answers, but is there one person appointed at school that these kids know that this is who I would go to if I had to? Is there one person?
Well, we try not to have one person, but
Okay.
even though the chief said usually the principal is always the person someone can go to. But if the principal's not around, we need to have other people, so, you know, we have kids who are well connected with our custodians, with our, you know, people who work in the kitchen, we have coaches, we have teachers, so what we try to encourage kids to do is find a trusted adult on campus, no matter who it is, and then those adults know the process and getting the information to the counselors, to the administrators, and ultimately to the law enforcement.
Right, because like I said, those kids are gonna have special relationships with a different teacher, and you want them to be able to go to the one they feel most comfortable with. Because if you had one that was designated, and that's not somebody they feel comfortable talking to, they may be like, I don't really wanna go share that with that person.
So it's
You know,
that they
one of-
feel safe.
At the end of my school year, whichever grade, last year it was my sixth grade, actually my fifth and sixth grade last year, I sat down with them and I said, because most of those kids at the elementary level, a lot of them you've had since they were in TK kindergarten. And so you've got a pretty good relationship with them. But they all know there's a 4-digit number. They call my school, they dial this 4-digit number where it doesn't matter if they're in junior high or high school. You call me and I promise I'll find somebody to help you. But in thinking about that, I thought, you know, at the high school, you know, they're so removed from me at that point, they're probably never gonna call me. But if they do have that adult, I wonder if it could be the challenge to them. Find that adult, identify them, find out what their 4-digit extension is for their phone, and put that in your cell phone, so that they always have a number with them at all times. Just a thought. Cause maybe it is a custodian, and the custodian has a line.
I just had a thought, what about a student that they could talk to, another student?
A phone connection.
Like a peer ambassador.
I don't know what the term would be, but I just had this thought that, you know, if kids having trouble talking to a responsible adult, they're always talking amongst themselves, you know, in whatever form.
Yeah, and maybe that transcends into knowing that, hey guys, if you're all sitting around talking, but you're, you know, one of you is bound to go and tell somebody, right? So, like, all right, well, if I don't, I know maybe so-and-so will go and talk to the principal, cause she's louder or whatever than I am, but yeah.
Yeah, that would help the quote unquote shy.
Yeah.
Kid who,
Yeah.
and from my experience when I was in high school, I didn't wanna go talk to the principal.
Yeah, me either.
Right, nobody wants to go to the principal's office.
It wasn't because I had like, I didn't like, it was just really like that seemed like a scary thing to do.
Yeah.
It's
So, yeah, I
intimidating.
think a peer,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think we can work on one more over here. So just relate to that.
We have an Explorers program, and there are kids from Nordhoff that are in the Explorers program, so. For those that don't know, the Police Explorer program's for kids that are 14 to 21 years of age. Doesn't mean they have to get into law enforcement, right? This is just an introduction into what we do, and they'll learn a lot of great leadership skills, a lot of communication skills. They're gonna learn about what we do, and then a lot of times they may decide, hey, that's what I would do, or they really, I have no intention of doing that.
But it teaches them a lot of the good life skills they can do in a very safe environment with great leaders and, very cool competitions they get to participate in throughout the year.
My memory was jogged when someone said have a peer, I'm gonna go to boarding school, and we did have peer counselors. And we were, I remember, actually was one, we were trained, but not just on safety issues, but children, you know.
That's what I wrote down.
peers-
Peer counseling program.
And we actually had a fairly rigorous training. It was about eating disorders, about sexuality, about safety, and people knew who we were. And just, you know, here and there would approach us, and then we had to appoint people that we could communicate with readily.
Yeah.
Super nice.
We might not have that tomorrow, just in case you're gonna leave here and think that, tomorrow you're gonna have all these kids rolled out. But it's something we can definitely put on our long-term, side of the list.
Well, we do have something, at play at Nordhoff's called the Senior Sibling Program, so every freshman is attached to a senior, so there is something.
Yeah.
But we would like to expand it because when freshmen become sophomores and then juniors, their senior has since graduated, so, you know, this might be a nice evolution of that program.
All right, anything else for the good of the group? Any other?
Thank you for hosting this, and thank you to our speakers, thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you
for
very
all of
much.
you for taking the time out. I know it's kind of it's a little traumatic of a topic. Like, I've heard the chief twice this year, no offense, I don't wanna hear you again. Like, it's scary. It's scary to think about. It's scary for you, it's scary for our teachers, it's scary for our principals, it's scary for me. But I appreciate you being brave and coming here to talk about this, because that's the only way that we do this work, is by addressing it and not by pretending it's not gonna happen to us because we're somehow special. We are special, but we're special because we're addressing this together. So, thank you. Doug just told me he's gonna get us lots of everything, all the resources we need to make all these great things happen.